Yes.
ready to study a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So here's what we're going to do. I haven't done one of these on Zoom before, but what I'd like to do is I'm going to share in a second the text. I could also send it out to anybody if anybody wants to have the text with them so they're not reading off of the screen as I'm talking.
Well, how will we manage that? We'd have to have it on a screen, won't we?
Well, I'm going to have it on the screen also, don't worry.
Okay.
But if you want the text itself, there you go.
Could you email it or send it to via Zoom?
Or just attach it in the group chat.
There you go.
Ah,
Thank you.
And also, we can do it this way. Nope. That's what we want. That's what we want. All right.
Okay.
So let's take a look just for, so anybody has any questions at any point, please interrupt, talk. I mean, this is supposed to be, as I advertised, there's no, whatchamacallit, there's no requirement for prior knowledge. We're going to go through some text. We're going to go through some different commentaries, and we're going to look at what one of the themes of this portion. This coming week, we're in the, so let me just give you a little bit of background of where we are right now in the Torah reading, okay? We are in the book of Leviticus. What does the book of Leviticus talk about?
Rabbi, could I suggest that you ask us all to mute unless we want to ask a question, because it just, the sound quality would be better.
I would be happy to do that. If you want to mute while I'm talking, that's absolutely fine. If you have a question, please, by all means, at any point, interrupt and let me know what your question is, okay? Yes, Karina, you have a question, and Joel has a question. You're muted. Say that again. I can't unmute you. Karina?
Yes, my question was, could you please request everybody to mute? And you did.
Yes, I did. Ah, well, there you go. No problem. And Joel has a question. Where's Joel?
Well,
Don't say anything.
that was the same.
I don't know you, or maybe I do.
Is that me? Who's that?
That's a recording of you being played back. Are you sure that person's gone?
Yeah. There's no one here now that I don't know. That was really strange. Okay. Joel, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I don't know what happened. I just pressed that button and something happened.
Okay, no problem.
sorry, can I just ask one thing?
Sure.
The reason I'm dressed like this is I've got a meeting after this at 9 o'clock, so I don't want to be rude, but at 9 I'll disappear to, well, not, I'll just have to join another meeting. I've got like a research thing, and then if you guys are still here, I'll join back if that's okay.
No problem. We should be, well, we'll see how long we go, but let me know. All right. Excellent. Great. So let's look, by the way, any point you have a question, unmute yourself or raise your hand and I'll know if you have a question, okay? But the idea is, as much as possible, we want to have some kind of interaction here. Torah is best studied, or text or anything is best studied in an interactive kind of way. Okay? So that being said, here we go. So this week in the Torah reading, or where we are right now in the portion, is what? The book of Leviticus, excuse me, is really about the Levites, right? But it's more than that. It's about the role that the Levites play, the Kohanim, the priests, the ethical and moral guidelines as well. So you have things like the ethical, moral rules of which we're going to get to very soon, about being a holy nation, justice, and things of that. Last week, we had an introduction to the rules of kashrut, okay? So what is that all about? Keeping kosher? Do we know why we do it? Anybody know? Tell me, why do we keep kosher?
To keep ourselves separate from the rest of the community.
Right, to keep ourselves separate. Now, has anybody ever heard the idea that we keep kosher because it's healthier? Show of hands, anybody ever seen that? Ever heard that before? Yeah, we've heard that for health reasons, right? That dirty animals or some such explanations, right? So what's interesting, last week, if you look here, this is Abarbanel. Now, Abarbanel is one of these commentators. He always starts his commentary with questions. Okay. Now, I didn't copy the question here, but I want to highlight this part here. Oops, not there. And he's going on about why we should keep kosher. And he wants to make sure that we understand, because Rambam, Maimonides, okay, he was, among other things, a physician, a doctor. And one of the things that he talks about, sorry, not Rambam, Ramban Nachmanides, he says that that it is because, here, if you see here, that is because of, it is because of the body's health and medical care, those foods being bad and generating a harmful moistness. Okay, that's the view of Ramban. That's why Ramban says we don't keep we keep kosher. But Abarbanel wants everyone to understand, no, God forbid, and it's quite the Chalilali, which is a very, very powerful rebuke to his rabbinic colleague. The Chalilali, God forbid that I should believe this, because if that were the case, the Torah would be on the level of a minor book among the books of medicine, right? He's saying, no, the reason we keep kosher is not specified. We don't really understand why. It is not just simply a health, medical cleanliness reason. There's a much deeper spiritual understanding of why we do that, okay? Of why we do that. So how did we do? So let's look. So that's last week we were talking about kashrut. So this week we're talking all about the wonderful world of what? Rashes and impurities and things that are generally called leprosy. Now, I'm not a doctor. Thankfully, Saif, we have, Saif, we have a doctor in the house. So if I have any medical questions, I can for sure pertain to him. But if you actually read some of the description of later on, which we will see about what the Bible says is leprosy, you realize that, I mean, please jump in, doctor, and tell me that that is not what leprosy actually is. And you could see, we'll come to it later, but way down here when we talk to, this is where Rambam, Maimonides, he was a doctor, and he's telling us that what is it? Leprosy is what? Shem ha'omor b'shutafut kolel inyanim harbe she'ein domim ze lazeh. It's just a homonym. Leprosy is a homonym embracing various meanings, okay? It's just a catch-all term of skin afflictions of some sort. So I want to make sure that we begin the conversation what we're talking about, that please get out of your mind these diseases or skin irritations or rashes or whatever it is that we're talking about in the Torah. It's many Torah translations use the word leprosy. It's not what we consider today to be leprosy, okay? There's some kind of skin irritation, something or other, but it's not that. Okay, it's not that at all. So we're going to come back to that definition later about why that is, but I want to make sure we understand what really it is that we're talking about. Okay, so so we have a further idea. So what is this idea of illness, right? Because the week before we're talking about how the Torah, some people think that there's a very specific rational reason why, and some are saying that no, this is a spiritual understanding that we need to understand this not in a medical, physical, not metaphysical, but medical or physical sickness. It's a very different understanding, okay? So one would ask the question, well, why would then God create illness in the first place, right? If God's creation was perfect, if God's creation was the epitome of and the perfect creation of, how could we then have disruption or impurities, if you will, in the Torah, right? In the world that we have. So one of the things here, this is in the Midrash. Now the Midrash, for those who don't know, oops, let me turn that off. Sorry about that. In the Midrash, it's there's a question already. Free will? Anna's saying, is it free will? Well, yes and well, not really, because in this case, what we're talking about, so just let me, the Midrash is, in a way, it's the earliest rabbinic sermons. There are ways of people who are trying to fill in the details that's missing from the simple text of the Torah reading, of the Torah. So the best example normally I give for this is the story of Abraham smashing the idols, right? Who's heard that story before, right? The story goes, I mean, the reason it's there is because we have the generations. We have the story of Adam, then 10 generations later, we have the story of Noah, and then 10 generations later, all of a sudden, we're introduced to Abraham at 75 years old, that he's saying to go and lech lecha, me'artzecha, go from your land, from the place where you know where you were born, from your brother's house, and go to the land that I'll show you. So the rabbis are saying, well, hang on a minute. What is so special about Abraham? Why would we need to, why is this guy, of all people, why is he being the one who's going to be picked for this purpose? So the rabbis come in the Midrash, and they come up with this story that he destroyed his father's idols as a show of how important monotheism was and how dedicated and true to his faith that he was, even before, and that's showing why he deserved to be picked to be the messenger of God, right? So in this case here, what they're talking about in the Midrash, this is a little bit later on. Saif was saying, it is because he was the first to call for monotheism. Well, yes, but the Midrash there is trying to justify why he was picked in the first place. And that's what the Midrash does. It fills in those blanks from the text that just aren't there, okay? So that's what the Midrash here is doing. And in the case here, it's this story, what I'm talking about, because it brings forth a very, very important rabbinic understanding, okay, here that I highlighted and bolded here in the English. Ela kol ma shenivra b'sheshet yamei bereshit tzrichin asiyah, which means anything that was created in the first 6 days, meaning everything that was created at that point needs further action. Or really a different way to understand that is not necessarily, it requires working on, I suppose, work to improve it, okay? The raw materials are there, but we still need to understand that it's not in its finished state at that point, okay? It's not in its finished state at that point. So, okay? So understanding that, that's this understanding rabbinically that these things happen and occur in our tradition. So we need to understand what that means to work on them. And then you have this further idea in the Bible, right? It says God at the end of creation, right, on the end of the sixth day, Vayivarech otam Elohim vayamar lahen Elohim peru urvu umilu et haaretz. That's not the important part, you know, have lots of babies and fill the land. Yes, however, v'chiv shuha, and master it. This is the traditional understanding. It's not dominate and do whatever you want and take advantage of nature. That's not the rabbinic understanding of what master it means, okay? It means here to further improve on what was created, okay? So the world was not necessarily in its finished state. Therefore, v'chiv shuha here is this understanding from the Midrash, and a lot of other commentaries are saying it needs to be continue to be worked on. So it's not in its finished state. So having those background information there, let's get a little bit into here what the text is saying. Okay, so not that one from Genesis. So there are three different selections of text I want to look at from this week's portion, from Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 13, 3-5, 50 to 51, and 14, 37 to 45. They're all here. Would someone like to read for me in the English? You can unmute yourself and read. I would be greatly appreciated, or I can do it too, or I can unmute you and pick you yourself. Excellent.
I'll read if you like.
Go for it.
The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white, and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if it is a white discoloration on the skin of his body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair in it has not turned white, the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him, and if the affection has remained unchanged in colour, and the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days.
Right? Now, many of us have been isolated for quite a bit longer than that, right? I'm guessing. Now, we're going to come back to that idea, but this first section here is the beginning of the least severe of these cases, where it is what? Simply on the person, okay? And interestingly, it's the priest who goes, because there were some understandings, right? There were some understandings that what was the cause of this? It was an imbalance in the spirit and the body. The soul and the body were imbalanced, and therefore this is a manifestation of that which is an illness. That was what some of them believed, okay? So it's the priest who goes, and it's the priest who sees that it is, again here, leprous. Please don't read that as leprosy. It's just some affliction of the body, okay? So 7 days, which is a complete cycle. He goes and he checks, and if he's still, then he has to go and do it again. Now, the next section, who would like to read that? Yes, please. Karina, go for it.
Okay, hang on. It's just going to make it a little bit bigger.
No problem. I can do that.
This is 13:50:51. Okay. And the priest, after examining that bit, or the next one?
Yeah, right here.
And the priest, after examining the affection, shall isolate the affected article for 7 days. On the 7th day, he shall examine the affection. If the affection, we'd call it affliction, but anyway, has spread in the cloth, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in the skin, or for whatever purpose the skin may be used, the affection is a malignant eruption and it is unclean.
Right? Yuck. It's now spread from the body to the clothing. It's a further escalation, right? Doctor, if you see that sort of thing happening, would you be a little bit worried? Finally, we go to the last one. Who would like to read that? I will pick you if you don't. There you go. Thank you, Doctor. Go for it.
If, when he examines the plaque is in the walls of the house, is found to consist of greenish or reddish streaks that appear to go deep into the wall, the priest shall come out of the house into the entrance of the house and close up the house for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall return. If he sees that the plaque has spread on the walls of the house, the priest shall order the stones with the plaque in them to be pulled out and cast outside the city into an unclean place. The house shall be scraped inside all around, and the coating that is scraped off shall be dumped outside the city in an unclean place. They shall take other stones and replace those stones with them, and take other coating and plaster the house. If the plaque again breaks out in the house, after the stones have been pulled out, and after the house has been scraped and replastered, the priest shall come to examine. If the plaque has spread in the house, it is a malignant eruption in the house. It is unclean. The house shall be torn down, its stones and timber, and all the coating on the house, and taken to an unclean place outside the city.
Right? So now it's even more severe. It went from the person to the clothing, now to the house. Okay? Now, I'm not aware of any disease that could actually do that. It sounds, doctor, is there something that could happen like that?
Maybe corona? I don't know.
Corona's not going to infect the bricks in my house, right?
Oh.
But you understand that this is like head scratching. So what exactly are we talking about here? We're living now today. How does this even speak to us? What is this possibly going to mean? Okay. So if you're wondering those questions, have no fear. You're in great company, because the rabbis were also like, what's happening here? This doesn't make any sense. So what they do, again, in the Midrash, but this time the Midrash from the book of Ruth. Okay. And here they're trying to understand there was a sequence here that happened. Okay. There was a sequence here that happened Mold. Lindsay, yes, some of us could think it could be mold. That's one idea of what it could be, but the rabbis being the rabbis, the simple answer is never the good one, right? It's got to be a little bit more homiletically or spiritually interesting to them. So if you recall the story of the book of Ruth, the two children, right? Who were they? Is there a bigger picture? So not necessarily a physical issue. Absolutely. We're going to get to that. Don't read ahead. Okay. Don't steal my thunder.
These are the two sons-in-law.
Yes.
They're the
Exactly.
sons-in-law of Ruth.
Exactly right. Machlon and Chilion, right? So these two guys, they died, right? They were not very wonderful people. Okay. What did they do? It's unclear, but they died. And so they're trying to draw this connection. Why would they have died this way? So let's look here. So these two rabbis, the son of these two rabbis, his son-in-law, the master of mercies at first does not take punishment from souls. Okay. What does that mean? It means that the first level of punishment is not going to be the most severe. Okay. There was an escalation there. There was an escalation. The killing of Machlon and Chilion, the two sons-in-law of Ruth, was the final stage. Well, so then classic rabbinic, from where do you teach this? Right? Because as any good academic or lawyer or anything, you can't just make stuff up. You have to be able to cite it and source it and connect this to somewhere. Okay, so the question is, right, and the connection will be very clear in a minute, but they're asking the question, Machlon and Chilion died. Well, these rabbis have a saying that the master of mercies, God, really, is compassion, is merciful. So the first punishment that they were bad or evil or whatever was that they died. So these rabbis are saying, no. There was an escalation. There was, okay, so what was it? So now, as good rabbis that they are, they're going to go cite from a third place. Now we're going to look at a third place and look at a different story, right? And who remembers the book, the story of Job, right? From Job, as it says, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing, right? The Holy One, blessed be he, revealed to him a vision, a sketch of the world. The plowman shall meet the reaper. Okay, sorry, that's not important here. Hold on, let me fix that for you. Because I'm trying to keep this as simple as possible. We don't need all this extra stuff here. Good. Came to Job, and the oxen were plowing when the Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off. Okay. Remember the book of Job, that the adversary is going to test his faith. So he's going to make all these horrible, terrible things happen to him. So what's the first thing that gets attacked? The oxen. Okay. Then, and only I alone have escaped to tell you. Okay. Then the next one over here. And while he was still speaking his account, he died. This one was still speaking, and a Chaldean formation of 3 columns came, and he said, and some other things died, right? And then, sorry, this didn't copy properly, but there's an escalation here, right? I can read it to you from a different place, which is a little bit easier to understand. Where is the rest of it here? That's down over here. That the idea is that the oxen dies, right? Then his sheep die, and then the camels die, and then when he was still so each one, as they're still speaking, tells them, you know what, the easiest way to do this.
Sorry, I think we've got a visitor back.
We do?
Yeah. iPad?
I don't know what that is. Thank you. I know I didn't see that. iPad. Who's iPad? Oop, gone. They left. Okay. Are you guys seeing this? I'm opening the new tab here. Yes?
Yeah.
Excellent. So we're gonna, by the way, if you haven't used Safari, you absolutely should, because it's phenomenal. Okay, so we'll just read it straight from here. Okay, so the adversary comes, and he says, the oxen were plowing and the she-asses were grazing, and the Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came and said, God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep, and the boys burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you, right? So first it was the oxen and the she-asses, and then it was the camels. This one was still speaking when Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off and put the boys to the sword of the servants, and I have alone escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking. Now we have the final escalation. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of the eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house so that it collapsed upon the young people, and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you. Okay? Now, wow, what's going on there? Now, I want to be clear. We're not going to go into a theological discourse on the book of Job. We'll do that another time. The point here, and the rabbis will do this all the time, is that they will quote things out of context just to make their point. Okay? Now I'm going to be truth in advertising. I'm definitely quoting out of context here, but they're showing the pattern. Okay, that it wasn't just because of all those things that happened to Job. What was the worst? Clearly, his children dying. Right? Clearly, but it's showing that there was a pattern. There was first the oxen, then the sheep, and then the camels, and then his children. Okay, and so they're using that here to show why did Machlon and Chilion die? Because remember, there wasn't the first ones that died. Let's go here to Ruth. And so with Machlon and Chilion, it went this way. At first, their horses, donkeys, and camel died. And then later, their father died, Elimelech. And after that, then these two, Machlon and Chilion, died. Okay? So when it makes the point they're trying to make here is God is merciful. God is not just going to say, hey, you messed up a little bit, zap, you're dead. There is going to be an escalation. There's going to be a way for you to, right? This is supposed to be seen really as a warning system, right? A warning system that, hey, you're not meeting your expectations, or hey, you're sinning, or hey, something bad is happening here. Therefore, I'm going to send you a warning. In the case here, these guys didn't help themselves. However, in our case, what's the first warning? The body. The body being infected, or with that rash, or whatever you want to call it, that's the first sign. The second is your clothing. Hey, pay attention, something serious is happening to you. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And finally, the third one is your house. That one is the last step, okay? That is one of the ways that we understand what this is supposed to mean, okay? So that begs the question, why does that not still happen today? All right? If indeed this is saying that this way of understanding, this different increasing of intensity of this outbreak of whatever it is, well, great. I see the logic there. Not necessarily agree with it, but I see the logic. Well, what is the purpose then? Why does it not still happen anymore? So Sforno, who is an Italian commentator, he says, well, among other things, we're not at that stage anymore of our existence as a people that we would recognize those signals from God, right? He puts here, when the Jewish people are predominantly in the state of spiritual coma, the author just described, which is further up here. It's a very, very, very long discourse. The symptoms described in our portion will not appear, as it would be a waste of time to hope that the people thus afflicted would see in these symptoms a message from their God. Yes, Shira.
But can't we also look at it as a more simpler time where people had to be warned of a terrible catastrophe before they would react, whereas now we're more sophisticated rather than in a state of spiritual coma, so it would be a waste of time?
You could see it that way, but what the point he's making is, because he's trying to answer the question, why don't we still see this skin affliction or rash or whatever afflicting you, your clothing, and your house? Why does that not happen anymore? And he's answering the question. His premise is that it's not happening anymore. Why? Because we are too jaded. We are in a spiritual coma, and we wouldn't recognize that we wouldn't recognize these afflictions as a message from God for us to shape up. So that's Sephorno's answer for why this doesn't happen. It's a nice, simple answer, tidy, but I mean, again, okay. But if that indeed is the case, and I'm just in the brief time that we have, I just wanted to show a brief introduction, a different way to see these things. Well, okay, fine, that's one way to look at it, but it doesn't answer the question, which is the primary question: why does this happen in the first place? Right? If we're saying that it's a warning, well, fine, a warning for what? What are we doing that deserves this kind of affliction, right? We have many of the transgressions that we have an associated cause or punishment, right? The Kabbalists discuss kilpot shells. What's kilpot shells? I don't know what that is. Anna?
Sorry, I haven't spelled that correctly. I think it's klipot.
Oh, klipot. Yes. Are you talking about the broken vessels, right?
No, I'm talking about sorry, I may have got the terminology incorrect. The layers, our layers that we have, these shells around us. So our insight has changed.
Our insight has changed. So that's why we don't see that anymore. Yep. Listen, there is, just talking about this is, you can spend, days, hours on this. Just trying to give you a way of the Ramitic thought process of how this works, right? So they're going from one place, but there's still a common thread here of why these, so they're tying these three different mentions into a warning system. Great. And I want to be clear, just one explanation why we don't have it anymore is from Sforno, right? He's an Italian commentator, and he's saying we don't have it anymore because it's a waste of time for us to even recognize that as a message from God. Great. Okay. But let's take even a further step back. Why does this happen in the first place? And here's a pretty classic understanding of where this idea comes from. We looked at this briefly. So this is Rambam, now Maimonides, okay? Now remember, he was many things. He was a doctor, he was a philosopher, he wrote Jewish law, he also wrote a philosophy, the Guide to the Perplexed, the Kuzari, very, very rational in his thought, okay? So one of the connections that we make here, so he's talking a lot about here what it is. It means a lot of different skin conditions, okay? The falling off of some hair, the whiteness of a man's skin is called leprosy. The falling off of some hair is called leprosy. Change of color in clothing or house is referred to as leprosy. Now this change in clothes in the houses which the Torah has called leprosy it's a homonym, okay? It's not a natural, first, okay, it's not a natural phenomenon. So what is it then? If it's not a natural phenomenon, it's deemed a sign and wonder among the people of Israel. For what? To warn them against evil gossip. I'm sorry, what? Where did that come from? Right? Now, there is a connection here, I promise, but where does it come from? Okay? Now, I'm sorry?
Is it perhaps relating to the leprosy that Miriam suffered?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. We have the story of Miriam, right? Where she is
because she spoke against her brother.
Exactly. Exactly. So, well, she didn't speak against her brother. She spoke against his wife.
His wife, yes, Zipporah.
Exactly. So what happens then?
she's afflicted with
She's afflicted, right? She all of a sudden has Mitzarat
the scaly thing.
scaly thing. So we know this concept that we also have when Moses the Metzorah Kashaleg, the white scaly whatever, is the same thing in whatchamacallit, in at the burning bush, right? Where he says, let's hear, I'll see if I can pull that up real quick. He says, if we go to Exodus, chapter, not 21, we want chapter 3. And Moses is they're going back and forth. I don't believe you. This is not going to happen. You can't make me do it. And finally, he gives them his signs and wonder. What if they don't believe me? What is that in your hand? He says, a rod. Okay. Cast it on the ground, turns to the stake. Yeah, we know that part of the the story. But further, he says, put your hand into your bosom, right? In your, whatever, in your shirt. He put his hand out into his bosom and he took it out. His hand was encrusted with snowy scales. Metzoraat kashaleg. Okay? In this case, it's not an affliction. It's not a punishment. But that's it's the same word. Now, that's the same thing also when Miriam gossips or says whatever she's going to say against Moses' wife. All of a sudden, she has that. So the rabbis, homiletically, they're drawing the connection. If you're going to get afflicted with this, Metzorat, clearly, there's no other rational explanation. Clearly, it has to be, why? Because you were gossiping, right? Now, makes sense, right? Metzorat means that you're gossiping, and we have a whole huge collection of laws about gossiping. It's called Lashon Hara, okay? What do you mean, Saif? What do you mean? Is it because they both spread? What do you mean by that?
I just mean, is it because sort of the gossip spreads, starts something small and then it goes bigger and bigger and bigger?
Oh, I see. You're drawing that connection too. Possibly. I mean, that's a very nice connection there. Hadn't thought about it that way. That works. But that's a nice idea. I like that. Possibly. Where were we here? So it's to warn them against evil gossip. Okay. So if a man dealt out malicious gossip, the walls of his house would change. If he repented, the house would become clean again. But he persisted in his wickedness until the house was demolished. Leather objects in his home upon which he would sit or lie would then suffer a change. If he repented, they would become clean again. But if he persisted in his wickedness until they had to be burned, the clothes which he wore would undergo a change. Now, the problem with what Rambam is doing is he's inverted the order. Okay? Because first, we saw from the Torah, what happens first? It's your skin, then your clothing, then your house. For some reason, he's inverted that, and I'm not sure why. Okay? But his point is, he's carrying on with this idea that Seforno introduced and the Midrash introduced, is that it's a warning system. You do this, you start, that's what he's using, you start to gossip, right? You start to gossip, your skin is going to erupt into whatever. And then if you don't repent, and if you keep doing what you're doing, then your clothes. And if you keep doing it, then your house. And that's where it comes from, okay? He persisted in his wickedness until they had to be burned. His skin would suffer a change and he would become leprous, and to be put apart and exposed all alone so as not to engage in evil talk, which consists of mockery and malicious gossip. Okay, now, by the way, just to be clear, this writing is not a Bible commentary. This is in his Mishnah Torah. This is a book of code of law where he writes this, okay? So here he makes the very clear connection. In an attack of leprosy, you should be careful. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on your journey. Okay? Torah means to say, consider what happened to Miriam the prophetess who spoke against her brother, even though she was older than he and had nurtured him on her knees after having endangered her life to save him from the sea. Remember, she put him in the ark, not the ark, the little basket, sent him down the river, and she endangered her life. Saif, we'll see you soon. Text me. I'll let you know if we're still on, okay? Now she did not disparage him, but made the only mistake in placing him on a level with other prophets. This is very interesting because Rambam is saying, no. Miriam didn't attack or say anything. All she did was put Moses on the same plane, the same level as other prophets. Whereas we know, of course, that Moses is at a much higher level. How dare you do that, right? And Moses didn't mind, right? Because Moses was very humble. In fact, the only characteristic we know of his personality about Moses is that he's humble. That's the only thing the Bible tells us. And yet, in spite of all that, she was immediately punished with leprosy. Right? How much more then is this applicable to evil men, these fools who keep talking arrogantly and boastfully? It is therefore proper for the man whom would steer his course of life aright to shun their company and refrain from talking with them, that he should not be caught in the net of evil and arrogant men. The company of wicked mockers follows this usage. At the outset, they indulge in much idle talk, as it is written. The fool's voice comes with a multitude of words. Right? We've seen that before, and I'm not going to even comment on that. Just going to leave that out there. Thereupon they fall into discrediting the upright, as written, let dumbness strike the lying lips that speak insolence against the just. This is from the book of Psalms now. Then they go into the habit of talking about against the prophets and discrediting their words. It is written, they mock God messengers, despised his words, and derided. See, we're seeing again the same pattern, right? Escalation here. So you speak out against, first of all, there's a fool who establishes them by saying a bunch of nonsense, right? Ruth, you have to go too. No problem. We'll see you very soon. Right? Then you have someone who is going to then not only be a fool, what's the next thing they're going to do? They're going to speak ill of other people, of the upright. Then they're going to discredit leaders, prophets. Then after they've discredited the prophets, then the next step would be to discredit and go against God. Okay? And it's again this same idea. And he goes on quite a bit more here. But the idea here, and we can leave that just for a moment and come back here. The idea is a relatively simple one, trying to make sense in our lives today what this portion could possibly be talking about. Okay? Now, I get it, especially, and it's quite fun sometimes when I have bar mitzvah students and they want to, and they get assigned this portion and they start to read it and they're like, hey, what the heck am I reading here? Right? Because this portion it's got a lot of stuff about, women being impure after giving birth, and the impurity lasts longer if it's a girl than if it's a boy baby. Tune in next year, we'll talk about that one. That's a really fascinating topic as well. Like, what's that all about? But here, the very concept of what is this idea of illness, if you will, and why does it exist, and also what causes it, right? What causes it? So here is one rabbinic thread, and it's just one rabbinic thread going through establishing this concept that, yes, the world is not perfect, okay? It was created, and what that was created is for us to continue to work on, okay? And then this idea of that our ancestors perhaps had this warning system, but it's related, this illness is related directly by our causes, right? The things that we did. In this case, it is gossiping, speaking ill of other people. And it continues to in severity because, why? Because you're not stopping your behavior. That warning system is there for a reason. And you are not listening. You're not heeding the warnings. You're not changing your behavior. And in a way, then, it could be seen as a punishment. Now, I want to be absolutely clear. I'm not saying illness is here to punish us. I'm only simply showing you a rabbinic thread to try and understand how they might have attempted to make sense of this portion. Shira, question.
But then how does Saforno fit in with that? Because if we're too much in a stupor to be aware of that, how can we learn about Lashon Hara and change our behavior?
So how do we learn about it? Excellent question. So how do we learn about that indeed? Because in this case, what it's saying is, because he's trying to answer the question, these things don't happen anymore. Why not? Yes, absolutely, they did happen, but they don't happen anymore. Why? Because we were too in a stupor, or too dense, or cynical, or whatever word you want to use, to recognize these symbols and these warnings for what they actually are. So we have to be told in a different way, right? It's interesting, by the way, what's the punishment for someone who commits gossip? You go back. What is? Let me show you here. What did I mean by that? The guy who is where does he have to go? Right?
Into isolation.
Goes into isolation. Absolutely. Why is that the punishment? Because the rabbis in the Bible is actually pretty clever, right? The punishment almost always fits the crime, right? You kill somebody, you're killed, right? Here, so why is, if someone gossiped, why is their punishment isolation? Anybody here been gossiped about? Yeah, I have. How does it feel?
If they're in isolation, they can
Yeah,
only talk
you
to
feel like
themselves.
exactly right. So what you've done to that person by gossiping against them, we are now going to do to you. So you know what it feels like. And the idea, you know what it feels like, hopefully you won't ever then do it again. Right? So there's a very, so when they set this up, it wasn't just, I want to be clear, it's not the rabbis just saying, oh yes, because this happened with Miriam, right? The juxtaposition of these two texts right after one another, clear. No, there's a lot more thought that goes into to saying that this is a cause of this skin disease thing. Okay. And so that's just one of these beautiful touches that it's like, oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. You have isolated someone, you will now be isolated. Okay. You have said horrible things about someone that people think now this is going to happen to you physically. So
is there also an element in there, and I might have picked this up from Rabbi Sachs, around shame and guilt? So when you commit this, when you gossip, you're shaming someone else in the community.
Yeah.
And if what you're saying is true, you've brought to the surface perhaps their negative attributes and things they might be ashamed of. And hence the punishment is something that is visible on you.
Yeah.
And you therefore need to be isolated from the community. Kind of extend that idea.
It's very possible that they were thinking along those lines as well. I mean, we can also go into a huge long discourse of the laws of gossiping, lashon hara. It takes up a huge portion of a written law of the Jewish tradition. Like, just think for a moment on Yom Kippur, right? Some of the confessional prayers that we say. For example, the Al Chet, right? The long confession. Two-thirds of those have to do with sins of speech, right? Prayers that we say, the Ashrei, I think it's half of it. Each line has a word, a synonym of speech, whether you're praising, you're singing, making known, discussing, referring to, just that one prayer, Psalm 145. Speech is incredibly powerful. How was the world created? By speech. Let there be light, and there was light. Right? That's how and you know, contracts were not written; they were oral. Right? The oral tradition. It was not written down. These were things. The speech, the power of speech, is incredibly important. And if you abuse that, well, you would think that it would just be very simple to just walk away. There's no problem. There's no consequences because I said it. Well, no, this text and these ideas are trying to tell you, no, there is actually a lasting impression, a lasting punishment that is done not to you, but the person you spoke about. Right? There's lots of parables the rabbis gives about speech. One of them is speech is like an arrow. Once you let it go out of the what do you call it, the bow, you're never getting that arrow back. Right? The words are out there. Right? There's the famous story of the rabbi there's a guy in the town. He says nasty things about the rabbi, and he goes and he wants to apologize. He says, "I'll do whatever you want. I promise, whatever you want, I will make it up to you." So rabbi says, "Okay. Do you have a feather pillow?" The guy says, "Yeah, of course. Great. Come meet me in the field. Okay. Whatever you want, rabbi, I'm going to do it because I want to make it up to you. Okay." Brings a feather pillow. Okay, rabbi. Now says, "Rabbi, now what do I do?" Okay, take the feather pillow and rip it open. He says, "Rabbi, what?" He says, "Do it." Okay, whatever. I want to make this up to you. I'll rip it open. Of course, anybody ever cut a feather pillow or a down jacket? What happens?
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Everywhere. Rabbi, a guy says, "Okay, great. Now what?" He says, "Now pick up every single feather." The guy said, "That's impossible." I said, "Yeah. What you said about me, you can't take that back. Impossible. You're never going to get that back." And the story ends there. That's the tremendous, tremendous power of our speech.
So, Rabbi Kaiserblueth, since the warning system no longer exists, we can only begin to internalize this through allegory and through study of our texts, and because we're not going to understand the danger and the destruction of Lashon Hara unless we learn about it on the level of allegory and ethics, and what we're doing here tonight.
Well,
because people are not actually physically isolated any longer. So we don't have the warning system. B, we don't have the punishment system. What we do have is the texts, and the possibility of learning from those texts and then going out into the world.
That is, yes, it's not the only way. And I want to be clear here. I mean, listen, the connection between sara'at, the leprosy, whatever, and ill speech, that's pretty well defined in the rabbinic literature. But this idea of that warning system, I want to be clear, that's just one thread of interpretation. That's not necessarily the only way to understand this. I just picked one of them to share and illustrate and walk you through one developmental idea and the way the rabbis work. But even, I suppose, and even in some of these less more challenging texts, there's always something beautiful to take out of it. And look, and we're quite far away from what the text was actually talking about, right? Notice I'm not talking about, mold and whatnot growing on my house. And if you're worried, pretty sure there's mold in the Neuweg. So I don't know what that says about Emanuel, but whatever. But so, Meryl, you're right. There is this the studying of these texts is definitely the insight there. We have a rich tradition of these beautiful ideas that have been looked at and studied and handed down and modified and added to and interpreted throughout generations upon generations. And really the best way to do that is to begin to access them. And that's why I like when I'm teaching like this, I like to bring the actual primary sources so you can see for yourself what our tradition says. Because otherwise all you get is what somebody else thinks it means, and you haven't had a chance to look at it yourself. And that's really what we're going to be doing in these weekly sessions. Let's just take an idea, open the book, and actually look and see what it's saying. Anna, you have a question.
So, yeah, what if you have an issue with somebody and you need to talk to the rabbi about that person? Let's say they're causing you harm in some way.
Yeah.
Would that be considered gossip?
No. Well, depends. Like, it really depends on how you go into how you speak about it, and who you involve in it, and also what your purpose is. If it's simply to denigrate somebody and tear somebody down, then no, that's not allowed. If it's for your safety, if it's for your mental health, is it because they're harming you or some way, not necessarily physically, then yes, you can. That's a very gross oversimplification of it, and perhaps one day we should definitely go into the laws of speech, because they're really, really fascinating, really fascinating. There's certain things like you're not supposed to go into a store and ask the price of something if you have no intention of buying it, as an example. Something that you wouldn't think about Lashon Hara, but yeah, you're wasting somebody's time. You're giving them hope that you might actually buy it when you actually have no intention of. But to answer your question, Anna, I don't want to get so much into the specifics of it, but there are a lot of different rules, a lot of different subcategories, and a lot of different ways of how these rules are applied. And I think they're not, the rabbis wrote such a long, exhaustive, extensive list with the understanding, I think, that there wasn't going to be any way possible that we would actually be able to fulfill these. Because think about your life. Can you imagine not talking about somebody else? Can you imagine not having these conversations with people? Like, you wouldn't do it. That's part of what we do. But it's that ability to hopefully to strive towards, to aim to. Tim, sorry, Anna, does that answer your question? Sorry.
So I was just then going to ask, what's the purpose of speech then?
Purpose of speech is to guard it.
Is to guard it.
What? When even the purpose of speech? Well, the Talmud, the rabbis are teaching us, you have the power to build, to create a whole world, as God did, but you could also destroy a whole world with your words, right? Just think about any time you were embarrassed publicly or insulted publicly. How did you feel? Like your whole world collapsed on you. But we learned from the Bible, God created the whole entire world. Or even if you've had a public compliment, how do you feel? Amazing, like my whole world is incredible right now. So the purpose of speech is that's how we interact with one another. But remember, who we are is what we do. And we're hopeful that the way we interact with one another, the way we communicate with one another, the way we relate to one another, that should be mirrored in how we speak. That the aims of how high we want to get to, that righteous, just society, those words that we use should always be in the back of our minds. We're not perfect. We fall short of that. But the goal is to get to that point. All right? Tim?
Yeah, sorry. Am I? Oh, no, I'm on. Okay, good. So my other thought with this was I've read somewhere that perhaps the purpose of Leviticus was also to keep the Levites in line and to make sure that they followed the rules correctly and that the entire community could see this. And that what this portion is actually saying is even when people are, have things which might be quite scary and that the community wants to not deal with, the Levites have a responsibility to go and deal with it in their way. And in a way that would have been understood at the time. I mean, we might not look at this as a particularly effective way to deal with a skin infection, but this might have been the best they had.
Yes. Well,
I'm not sure if that works, but
sort of. I mean, the idea really is that the not really, because this is not about the Levites. This is Levites coming to cure. Right, that's not even coming to cure, but this is also, you could read into this about pastoral care also, because
yeah,
it's supposed to go, the high priest goes, right? Yeah. It's just because someone has this infection, this whatever, they still are part of the community. They still are looked after. All right. Excellent. Thank you guys for our first edition of Parsha study. Any suggestions or topics or things that you think might help improve, please, by all means. We will continue next week at same time, 8:15. If it's useful to have the text, I'll email it out ahead of time. If you're happy for me to just have it here and we can discuss as we've done today, please. But wonderful to see you all. I wish you all well.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure as always. And if you're interested, on Friday at 4 p.m. this week, Masorti Kabbalat Shabbat.
I thought it was 4:30. Is it 4:30?
I could be wrong. It's in the email. It's 4 or 4:30. I can't remember. It's all written down.
Fantastic.
Check your email. Check your email. It's all there.
Thank
A pleasure to see everybody very soon.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Cheers.
Bye, guys.
Bye.